The courthouse door slammed shut behind her as she walked through the metal detectors. She wasn't just any woman in a suit today. The officers who surrounded her didn't know her name, but they knew something was off. Their eyes narrowed as they eyed her with suspicion. The tension in the air was palpable, but then something unbelievable happened. As she reached the counter, one officer, still glaring, handed her a file and then froze in shock. The papers in his hand fluttered to the floor as his face turned pale. What did he just realize? What could possibly turn this situation upside down? Keep watching. The truth is about to hit hard. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and tell us where you are listening. Your support means everything. Ayesha had always been the kind of person who thrived under pressure. As a young woman of color, she had learned early on how to navigate spaces where people didn't expect her to be: law school, corporate boardrooms, and yes, even the courtroom. Every challenge she faced only made her more determined, more resilient. She wasn't from a family with deep legal roots, but she had always known she wanted to be a judge. Her parents had worked tirelessly to give her a chance at a life that was different from the one they had known growing up. They had sacrificed so much, but they had always reminded her, never let anyone tell you what you can't do. You've got the power. Make them see it. Ayesha had followed their advice. She graduated with honors from one of the top law schools in the country, made her mark as a promising attorney, and soon after, she was appointed as a judge, one of the few black women to hold such a position in her state. Her life was normal, yet always filled with a subtle tension. She'd gotten used to the sideways glances, the whispers when she entered a room. It was the unspoken reminder that, no matter how much she had accomplished, she still didn't quite belong. But she had learned how to silence those whispers, to stay focused on her goal. Make them see you as more than just your skin. Today was just like any other. Ayesha was preparing for a routine hearing in a high-profile courthouse. She donned her judge's robes, the fabric heavy but comforting, the symbol of authority she'd worked so hard to earn. As she walked through the courthouse lobby, her heels clicked sharply against the marble floor, echoing through the otherwise quiet space. But as Ayesha walked past the security checkpoint, she felt a strange, almost imperceptible shift in the atmosphere. She couldn't place it at first, but something felt different. A group of officers was standing near the metal detectors. They didn't seem to be in any hurry, just watching her. At first, it didn't register. But then, one of them made eye contact. He lingered for a moment too long, his gaze scanning her with a slight, almost imperceptible suspicion. It was subtle, but it was there. She shrugged it off. She'd been through this before, and she had learned not to let it shake her. They're just doing their job, she told herself. She went through the metal detector without a hitch. But as she stepped toward the courtroom doors, another officer stepped forward, blocking her path. "Mom," he said, his tone polite but firm. "Can I see your ID?" Ayesha felt her heart skip a beat. This wasn't normal. "Thank you, Mr. Richards," she replied, maintaining a calm tone. "I believe I'm clear on the facts, but I'll hear your argument." She didn't let the remark slide. She didn't have to. This wasn't the first time she'd been spoken down to. It was a bitter, constant reminder of what she had to face every day. The belief that because she was black, a woman, and young, she didn't deserve to hold such power. That she wasn't capable of handling a case unless someone explained it to her as if she were a child. The rest of the session went by with more of the same, veiled condescension, patronizing tones, and sideways glances. Ayesha could feel their eyes on her, their disbelief that someone like her could possibly belong here, that she had earned this position. And she could feel it all the more as she called the next case. But then came the turning point. Ayesha had barely made it through the morning when a knock sounded on the courtroom door. The bailiff entered, his face flushed, looking almost uncomfortable. "Excuse me, Your Honor," he said, hesitating for a moment. "There's a situation outside. It's about you." Ayesha's brow furrowed. "About me?" She glanced at the attorneys who seemed as confused as she was. "Thank you, officer. I'll step outside for a moment." As she stood, she felt the weight of every eye in the room. The whispers started before she even reached the door. "What's this about?" she wondered. "Why now?" When she stepped into the hallway, the scene she saw made her blood run cold. Outside the courtroom stood two officers, one of them the officer from earlier. He looked flustered, his eyes darting nervously between the other officers. A few other courthouse staff had gathered around, some looking on in curiosity, others in quiet concern. Ayesha's mind raced. What was going on? "Your Honor, I'm sorry to interrupt," said the officer, "but we need to speak with you about an issue that's come up." She could feel the blood rush to her face. The words stung, each one cutting deeper. She knew this was no accident. This wasn't a simple case of mistaken identity. This was bias. This was prejudice. "You must be mistaken," she said, her voice trembling with a mixture of disbelief and anger. "I've been serving as a judge for over a year now. I've worked in this courthouse for months. This is my office, my courtroom. How can you possibly—" But before she could finish, the door to the courtroom opened. One of the attorneys stepped out, his expression one of confusion. "What's going on out here? We've got a case to continue." The officer glanced at him, his posture suddenly stiffening, as if just realizing the full weight of the situation. "We're sorry, Your Honor," he said, almost bowing his head in a gesture that only made Ayesha feel more humiliated. "It's been resolved." But Ayesha could feel it. It wasn't over. Not by a long shot. As she turned back into the courtroom, a thought lingered in her mind, refusing to leave. Why was this happening? Why had they targeted her, the one person in the room who didn't need to be doubted, the one person who had already proven her worth? She knew this wasn't just about an ID mix-up. This was about how she, a black woman in a position of power, was seen as less than the others. She was suspected before she even had a chance to prove herself. As she stepped back into the courtroom, her mind was racing. She couldn't let this go. She had to find out who was behind this. She had to confront the discrimination that was clearly simmering just below the surface. The tension had reached its breaking point, and soon, the entire courthouse would feel it. The anger, the frustration, the injustice. The truth was about to come out, and it wouldn't be pretty. But Ayesha was ready. Ready to stand her ground. Ready to take on what was coming, no matter the cost. The question now was, what would happen next? And no one, not even her, could have predicted just how far this would go. The moment Ayesha stepped back into the courtroom, the air felt thick with the weight of every eye on her. The tension in the room was palpable. The courtroom now a battlefield. Everyone from the attorneys to the onlookers had witnessed the interaction in the hallway. The whispers were louder now, swirling in the background. Like vultures waiting for the kill, the gavel slammed down with an unexpected force. Bang! Ayesha's pulse raced, her hand trembling slightly as it gripped the gavel. She had always prided herself on being composed, but today, everything was different. "Mr. Richards," she said coldly, her voice cutting through the silence. The attorney who had been so dismissive of her earlier looked up from his notes, a slight smirk on his face. He thought this was over, that everything would return to normal. He was wrong. "I'm sure you've seen how things have unfolded today," Ayesha continued, her eyes locked on his. "But what I don't think you realize, Mr. Richards, is that I don't answer to you, or to anyone who thinks they can dictate my worth." His confident expression faltered. He hadn't seen this coming. "I've been underestimated my entire life," she went on, her voice rising with the truth of her words. "By people who think that because I'm black, because I'm a woman, then I don't belong here. And I've had to work 10 times harder than you and everyone else in this room to earn the respect I deserve. And yet, here you are trying to make me feel small." The courtroom was silent, the words hanging in there like an electric charge. Ayesha leaned forward slightly, her eyes never leaving Richards. "You thought you could treat me like an outsider, like an imposter, because you couldn't stand seeing me in this position of power. But guess what, Mr. Richards? I belong here, and I'm not going anywhere." Richards opened his mouth to respond, but Ayesha wasn't finished. "I've earned every inch of this position, every inch of respect. And you're going to learn that today. Because what I'm about to do is not just about one case. It's about sending a message." She paused, her gaze sweeping over the room, the weight of her words hanging heavy. "This will not stand. Not in my court. Not in my house." Ayesha's hand gripped the papers in front of her. She had been silent until now, but this was the moment. This was the turning point. She wasn't just going to let this slide. She wasn't going to let them get away with it. She turned to the clerk. "Call in the head of security. We need to have a conversation. Right now." The tension in the room escalated to a breaking point. There was a stunned silence. It wasn't just the officers who had underestimated her. It was everyone in this room who thought she would back down. She wasn't backing down. She was going to bring the entire system into the light, whether they were ready for it or not. When the head of security arrived, Ayesha's eyes never wavered. I want an investigation into why I was stopped earlier today. Why I was questioned like I wasn't supposed to be here. I want to know who made that decision. And I want it on record that I will not tolerate any more of this nonsense. I will not let anyone think they can undermine me because of my race, my gender, or anything else. The head of security looked between Ayesha and the officers who had been involved. He swallowed, clearly uncomfortable, but nodded. Yes, Your Honor, I'll make sure it's handled immediately. Ayesha nodded, her posture still resolute, her face betraying no emotion. It was done. But that wasn't the end. No, this was just the beginning. As the officers began to leave, a man in the back of the room stood up. He was older, with graying hair and an expression that screamed authority. He was a local judge, someone who Ayesha had known for years, though they were rarely in the same circles. His voice was calm but laced with an edge that immediately set off alarm bells. Your Honor, he said, stepping toward the bench. I think you've made your point. But I'm going to suggest that we handle this situation delicately. You don't want to cause any more disruption than necessary. We need to keep things professional. Ayesha's heart pounded in her chest. He wasn't trying to help. He was trying to shut her down, trying to make her feel like she had gone too far. But she wasn't going to let that happen. She looked him in the eye, her voice unwavering. You don't get to decide what's too far, Judge Hamilton. What's too far is allowing this kind of treatment to continue unchecked. What's too far is letting people like Mr. Richards assume they can control me. You want to keep things professional. Then let's start by respecting each other. And that starts with me standing up for what's right. Judge Hamilton's face reddened, his mouth opening and closing as he tried to form a response. But before he could speak, Ayesha stood, her gavel raised high. The court is adjourned. And if anyone has an issue with that, they can take it up with me, not with my gender, not with my race, and not with my authority. With that, she slammed the gavel down. As the room erupted into hushed murmurs, Ayesha knew this battle wasn't over. It was just beginning. But for the first time today, she felt the weight of it shift in her favor. She had taken a stand, made her voice heard. And now, everyone in that room knew she wasn't going to back down. But the question lingered in the air, would they let her win? Would the system that had always kept her at the margins finally bend, or would it break her? And as Ayesha walked out of the courtroom, she couldn't help but feel that the real fight had only just begun. In the days following the dramatic courtroom standoff, Ayesha was thrust into the public eye. The story had quickly gone viral, and soon, news outlets from across the state and even nationally were covering her case. The moment she had stood up, refusing to let bias slip through the cracks, had sparked a conversation about systemic racism in the judicial system, a conversation that couldn't be ignored anymore. The phone rang nonstop. Journalists sought interviews, reporters wanted statements, and people from all walks of life reached out, offering their support. But for Ayesha, the most significant calls weren't from the media. They were from other Black professionals in the legal field. Those who had experienced the same quiet oppression she had but had never found the courage to speak out. One call stood out among the rest, a young woman, just finishing law school, who had been inspired by Ayesha's bravery. Judge Thompson, her voice shook with emotion. Your actions, they gave me hope. I've been struggling with imposter syndrome. I've faced discrimination in my classes, at internships everywhere, but seeing you stand up like that, seeing you fight back, it made me realize that maybe I can do it too. Ayesha's heart swelled. This was why she had taken a stand, not just for herself, but for others who were still fighting to make their voices heard in spaces where they were constantly overlooked. She'd shown them that change was possible, that they didn't have to accept the biases they faced. But the real change was happening on the institutional level. The State Judicial Review Board had swiftly begun implementing reforms. The officers involved in the incident had been placed on indefinite leave, and an internal investigation into their conduct revealed a pattern of racial bias within the courthouse security team. The findings led to mandatory retraining sessions on racial bias and cultural sensitivity for all courthouse staff. The public outcry over Ayesha's treatment had pushed the system to confront its own prejudices. Ayesha, never one to sit idle, knew that this was just the first step. She had already begun working with a coalition of advocates, including civil rights groups and legal professionals, to push for broader reforms in how racial bias was addressed across the legal system. But despite the growing wave of support, the pushback was just as strong. There were murmurs behind closed doors, whispers about the troublemaker judge who was causing too much disruption. Colleagues who had previously respected her, even if they didn't fully understand her, now saw her as a risk. Some tried to quietly distance themselves from her, while others questioned her motives. They called her radical for demanding such sweeping changes. But they couldn't ignore the results. Judge Hamilton, the one who had tried to shut her down in the courtroom, had privately approached her in the days after the incident. His demeanor changed. He was no longer the confident, condescending figure who had looked down on her before. He was humbled, even apologetic, though he couldn't bring himself to fully admit his own biases. "I didn't realize the weight of what was happening until after you called me out, Ayesha," he said, his voice softer now. "You were right. I'm not proud of how I handled things, but I want to be part of the solution moving forward. Can we work together on this?" Ayesha didn't know whether to be relieved or wary. The system had always been built to protect the people in power, not to challenge them. But this was a moment for possibility. Ayesha wasn't just fighting for her own space at the table, she was fighting to make sure that others would never have to face what she had. Ayesha didn't answer right away. She just nodded, her gaze unwavering. "We'll see," she replied. The fight wasn't easy. It would never be easy. The road ahead would be full of challenges, and there were many who didn't want things to change. But Ayesha knew that she had made a difference. She had pushed open the door, and now others were starting to walk through it. Weeks later, in a meeting with the judicial board, Ayesha was told the news she had been hoping for. The reforms were official. The state had committed to creating an ongoing task force to oversee the implementation of diversity and inclusion practices in the judicial system. The program would not be a temporary fix, it would become an integral part of every court's operations moving forward. "I didn't do this alone," Ayesha said in a statement to the press later that day. "This isn't about one person. It's about all of us, those who have been fighting for equity, for fairness, for years. Today, we're starting something that should have happened a long time ago." And with those words, Ayesha's victory was no longer just a personal triumph. It was a victory for everyone who had ever felt invisible in a system that was supposed to protect them. It was a victory for those who had been silenced, ignored, and sidelined. Ayesha knew that the road to justice was long. This wasn't the end, but the beginning. The system hadn't changed overnight, but it had been shaken. And when you shook a system, it wasn't long before the cracks began to show. That's when real change could happen. And Ayesha would be there, standing at the front, leading the charge. Because for all the hurdles she had faced, there was one thing she knew for sure. The only way to change the world was to fight for it, to demand the change, and to never back down. This wasn't just about standing up to one officer or one judge, this was about standing up to the system itself. And Ayesha had learned that the only way to make a difference was to never let anyone make you feel like you didn't belong, because the power had always been hers. And now, everyone knew it. True change doesn't happen by waiting for the right moment or the right people. It happens when individuals, no matter the cost, decide that they will no longer accept injustice. Ayesha's story is a testament to the strength of the human spirit in the face of adversity, to the power of standing up when no one expects you to, and the courage it takes to challenge systems that have been in place for far too long. This is a call to action, to those who face injustice, to those who see the cracks in the system, to those who refuse to be silent. Your voice matters. Your fight matters. And together, we can create the change we desperately need. The road ahead is long, but every step forward is a step toward a more just world. Keep fighting. Keep standing up. Because the future depends on what we do today.